we're talking about what we do with our buildings and use of energy. We have established LEED standards for all of our city buildings. It's been LEED Silver. We actually haven't built anything in the last 2 or 3 years that's less than LEED Gold. So we're actually thinking about making that the standard, because that's what we're pursuing. And we are building the first net zero public safety building in our country. And the reason that's of significance, there are more and more net zero buildings, but public safety buildings, particularly that have something like an emergency operations center, has such a greater demand for energy that we're really finding it's particularly a particular challenge to meet the 24/7 and really high energy demands that come with this kind of a structure. So we're doing things across the board in the way we're going about our energy. I had thought, and I was glad to see St. Paul maybe has exceeded us, that we have the largest solar panel array on a building in the country with our convention center. But maybe that's St. Paul, so this is a healthy competition. We've done all kinds of things in terms of the way we require new buildings to be built to make sure we're both protecting solar access and we're orienting our buildings well to be able to take advantage of solar. And providing where we have historic areas, and we've got a number of historic districts in Salt Lake, to make sure we're also providing on historic structures for solar and renewable power generation. A lot of what we're doing obviously revolves around transit system development, and maybe that's something worth spending a minute on. I'll come back to this slide, but we've completely rewritten our ordinances to provide for basically mixed-use, form-based development codes for everywhere we have transit. And that, as we know, makes a big difference in making sure we're providing for much more walkable neighborhoods and the kind of mix of uses. Classical zoning in the US does not provide well for mixing uses, and that came out of Ohio with the Euclid decision in 1926, but we're really now moving back away from that to make sure we're providing for the mix of uses, and something we've spent a lot of time on in Salt Lake. Transportation is obviously a key. It is the artery system, it's the circulator system, and since World War II, we have moved so aggressively in the United States away from transit. We're all, I think, at the city level, scratching our heads and feel like we made enormous mistakes by basically abandoning rail and transit in our country, and we're moving very aggressively. In Salt Lake, in the Salt Lake area, we're actually getting a lot of national attention. We have the largest urban rail projects going on in the country. In 1999, we opened our first light rail line, 15-mile line down through the spine of the valley. We opened a second line up at the university a couple years later and extended that quickly to our health sciences complex a little further up the hill. We now are building 70 miles of, we've opened a commuter rail line 50 miles north about 3 years ago. We're now building 70 miles of rail to be completed by 2015. We're actually ahead of schedule. Looks like they're all going to be open by next year. It includes 2 new light rail lines that opened last summer, a commuter rail line going 50 miles south, and extension of some rail lines, one going out to the airport and one to extend that north-south spine further south in the Salt Lake Valley. In addition to that, we have just started construction last month on regenerating what used to be 145 miles of streetcar lines in Salt Lake. And we have 2 other streetcar lines that are in planning or design at this point. With the intention, obviously, to recreate a whole network of streetcars through Salt Lake. That streetcar line that we're just starting construction will be completed by the middle of next year. So we're really on track to do some very aggressive things in transportation. When I came in office, the first thing that I wanted to do, based both on my personal commuting preference by bike, but also because I heard so much as I was campaigning door to door that people said, you know, I'd love to bike more, but it just scares me to death to get out on the roads. And in the U.S., that is probably an exceptionally common phenomenon. We're not used to seeing bikes on the road. You literally take your life in your hands when you get out on the roads. I multiplied times 10 the amount of money we were putting into bikeways in my first budget. We've continued to expand that with full-time bike folks, and we have doubled our bikeway system in Salt Lake. We are now getting to, in some ways, the harder part of adding a lot of segregated bike lanes and bike trails, both for commuters and recreational purposes. But we're actually getting close to where we will have a regional bikeway system through the Salt Lake area and on the backside of the Wasatch tying together, I'm going to guess within the next 5 years. I'm just going to mention kind of one other area here, and that is living in a mountain setting as we do, we are heavily dependent on those mountains producing high quality and an adequate quantity of water for us. Salt Lake, as it was settled, was kind of an oasis in the desert. When that valley was settled, there were no trees in the valley. They have a monument where there was one tree in the valley, and but it became a place where our urban forest became a really highly desired and developed system. And there are obviously benefits to that, and they need to be cared for, but we basically live in the desert. As everywhere in the West, we have been able to maintain our water system by developing reservoirs to provide storage in the latter summer and fall months when we have very little rainfall and where our natural water system doesn't provide for itself very well. But it is a continuing challenge for us to protect that watershed mountain environment from development pressures, from the enormous increase in recreational use. It used to be the mining days, but those are largely gone. But we have fabulous ski resorts that are very aggressive in their development desires, and with that, and just the overall use in everybody's backyard in these mountains, it's created a tremendous impact. That is greatly complicated and increased by climate change. The way water works in our part of the world is we'll get rain in the valley, we'll get snow in the mountains in Salt Lake for the most part. As climate change has come, our snowpack has begun to diminish. Our vegetation patterns have changed. And our water supply ability has changed and is changing pretty rapidly going forward. So one of the things that we're spending quite a bit of time on is how we protect our watershed today and looking towards tomorrow. When I first moved to Salt Lake and was up in the mountains, we have the greatest snow on earth. That still remains. But we would not, I don't know, of course, challenge anyone. I've been in the Alps, and of course there were across the Rocky Mountains. But we would never see anything but snow in the mountains through the winter. Today, these past several years, it can rain at 9,000 feet. Our valleys are 4,500 feet. The tops of our peaks are 11,000. It's predicted that in the next 20 to 30 years, you will no longer be able to ski at Park City, which is about 7,000 feet. So everything is changing for us, and we're having to, in a very clear way, change the way we go about providing for water as a result of climate change. This is an exciting time, I think, for all of us as cities. We're all competing to try to be doing more, and I appreciate being part of the panel.